Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom sparkled like a jewelry box under 1,000 crystal chandeliers, each one casting prismatic light across the marble floors. Eleanor Chase stood near the back of the room, her emerald silk gown flowing around her like water, a glass of champagne held loosely in her fingers. She wasn't supposed to be here. Charity auctions weren't her scene. Not anymore. But her best friend Hannah had practically dragged her here with promises of an open bar and eligible bachelors, neither of which Eleanor particularly needed. At 34, she'd built her career as one of Manhattan's most sought-after divorce attorneys, and she'd seen enough of romance's aftermath to be thoroughly unimpressed by its beginning. "You need to get out more," Hannah had insisted that morning, holding up the emerald dress like a peace offering. "You can't spend every Friday night reviewing depositions and eating takeout sushi." Eleanor had protested, of course, but Hannah had a way of wearing down resistance like water on stone. So here she stood, surrounded by Manhattan's elite, wondering how quickly she could make a polite exit. The auction was in full swing, with items ranging from vacation packages to art pieces being sold to the highest bidder. Eleanor watched with detached amusement as a corporate executive bid $40,000 on a weekend yacht trip. Money made people do strange things, she'd learned. It made them generous and foolish in equal measure. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer's voice boomed through the sound system, pulling Eleanor from her thoughts. "We have something truly special. A mystery item that's been the talk of the evening. Item number 17, a date with a stranger." The room erupted in curious murmurs. Eleanor felt Hannah grab her arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging in slightly. "Wait, is that you?" Hannah whispered urgently. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She turned to her friend with wide eyes. "What are you talking about?" Hannah's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "I may have signed you up as a joke. I didn't think they'd actually use it." "Oh God, Eleanor, I'm so sorry." Before Eleanor could process the betrayal or formulate a response, the auctioneer continued. "This lovely lady has requested to remain anonymous for now, but I can tell you she's intelligent, successful, and absolutely stunning. The winning bidder will enjoy an evening of fine dining and conversation with someone truly extraordinary. Shall we start the bidding at $5,000? Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run, to disappear through the nearest exit, but her legs had turned to lead. This was a nightmare. She was a private person, someone who valued control and predictability. Being auctioned off like a prize heifer was her personal version of hell. 5,000, a voice called from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. 10,000, another voice countered. Eleanor scanned the room frantically, trying to identify the bidders, but the crowd was too thick, the lighting too dramatic. 15,000, 20,000. The numbers climbed higher, and with each bid, Eleanor's panic intensified. Hannah stood beside her looking absolutely mortified, whispering apologies that Eleanor couldn't quite hear over the roaring in her ears. $30,000, a woman's voice called out, strong and confident. For a moment, Eleanor thought the bidding might end there. 30,000 was a ridiculous amount of money for a single date. Surely no one would go higher. Then, she heard it, a voice from the front of the room, slightly slurred but unmistakably commanding. $5 million. The entire ballroom fell silent. Even the auctioneer seemed stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. $5 million. For a date. It was absurd. It was insane. Eleanor felt like she'd stepped into an alternate reality where money had lost all meaning. Did he just say 5 million? Someone whispered nearby. Who is that? Another voice asked. Eleanor craned her neck, trying to see the bidder through the crowd. People were turning, murmuring, creating a pathway as if Moses had just parted the Red Sea. And then she saw him. Sebastian Cross. Her stomach dropped to her feet. Sebastian Cross, tech billionaire, philanthropist, and as of 6 months ago her former client. The man whose divorce she'd just finalized in what had been the most contentious, exhausting, and ultimately victorious case of her career. He was standing near the stage, swaying slightly, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned and his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. Even from a distance, she could see his eyes were unfocused, his usually perfect posture compromised by what appeared to be significant alcohol consumption. This couldn't be happening. $5 million, the auctioneer repeated, finally finding his voice. We have $5 million from Mr. Sebastian Cross. Do I hear $5,100,000? Silence blanketed the room like snow. No one in their right mind would outbid $5 million for a charity date. Going once, the auctioneer said, his voice trembling with excitement. Going twice. Eleanor wanted to shout, to stop this madness, but her voice had abandoned her. Sold to Mr. Sebastian Cross for $5 million. The room exploded in applause and excited chatter. Sebastian's vision swam as the applause washed over him. He'd meant to bid $50,000, maybe $100 if he was feeling generous. $5 million had definitely not been the plan. But the champagne had been flowing freely all evening, and after the week he'd had, watching his ex-wife Vanessa parade her new boyfriend across every gossip site in New York, he'd decided numbness was preferable to feeling. Now he'd just blown $5 million on a date with someone whose face he hadn't even seen. His best friend and business partner Marcus appeared at his elbow, looking equal parts amused and concerned. "Seb, what the hell did you just do?" Marcus asked, trying to steady him as Sebastian swayed. "I bid on something," Sebastian said, his words running together slightly. "It's for charity, Mark. Charity is good. We like charity." "You bid $5 million, Marcus emphasized, clearly trying to get through the alcohol-induced fog. "Your accountant is going to have a stroke. Your board of directors is going to have questions. The press is going to have a field day." Sebastian waved his hand dismissively, nearly losing his balance in the process. "Let them talk. They always talk anyway. Might as well give them something interesting to discuss." He tried to focus on the stage where the auctioneer was announcing the next item, but his thoughts kept drifting. Why had he bid so much? Even drunk, $5 million was excessive. Maybe it was the mystery of it all. Maybe it was the way the auctioneer had described her. Intelligent, successful, stunning. Maybe it was because for one night, he could have something that wasn't connected to his failed marriage, his demanding company, or the constant pressure of being Sebastian Cross. "We need to get you some coffee," Marcus said firmly, guiding him toward the exit. "And some water, and possibly your head examined." They made their way through the crowd, people parting to let them pass. All eyes on Sebastian, he could hear the whispers, feel the weight of judgment and curiosity. This was nothing new. When you had a net worth that required scientific notation to express properly, every action became public spectacle. What was new was not caring about it. The divorce had stripped away something in him, some part that had worried about appearances and propriety. Vanessa had taught him that no amount of caring or trying could make someone stay if they'd decided to go. The hotel's private lounge was blessedly quiet compared to the ballroom. Marcus deposited Sebastian in a leather armchair and disappeared, presumably to find the promised coffee. Sebastian let his head fall back against the chair, closing his eyes against the spinning room. What a mess. He'd built a tech empire from nothing, turned a dorm room startup into a company worth billions, revolutionized cloud computing and artificial intelligence, but he couldn't navigate a simple charity auction without making headlines for all the wrong reasons. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his assistant. Probably his publicist. Probably someone wanting to know if he'd lost his mind. He ignored it. "Mr. Cross?" A woman's voice, sharp and familiar, cut through his alcohol-induced haze. Sebastian forced his eyes open and found himself looking at a vision in emerald green. No, not a vision. A person. A specific person. Recognition hit him like ice water. Eleanor? He managed, sitting up too quickly and immediately regretting it as the room tilted. Eleanor Chase stood before him, her arms crossed, her expression somewhere between fury and disbelief. His divorce attorney, his brilliant, fierce, uncompromising divorce attorney, who had somehow extracted him from his marriage with his company and most of his fortune intact. The woman who had sat across from him in conference rooms for 6 months, who had listened to his story, who had fought like a warrior on his behalf. And, apparently, the woman he'd just bought a date with for $5 million. "We need to talk," Eleanor said, her voice controlled but tight. "Obviously this is a mistake. We'll get it sorted out. I'm sure the auction house will understand once we explain the circumstances." Sebastian stared at her, his brain working slowly to process what was happening. "You're the stranger?" he asked stupidly. "I'm the stranger," Eleanor confirmed, her jaw clenched. "My friend signed me up without my permission. And you bid on me while drunk. So we're going to march back in there and explain that this entire thing needs to be canceled." She was right, of course. It was the logical solution, except something in Sebastian, something stubborn and reckless and still buzzing with champagne, rebelled against logic. "No," he said. Eleanor blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," Sebastian repeated, more firmly this time. "I made a bid. The bid was accepted. $5 million is going to charity. Children's hospitals, if I remember correctly. We're not canceling anything." He could see the frustration building in her expression, the way her green eyes flashed with barely contained emotion. God, she was magnificent when she was angry. He'd seen it before, in depositions when opposing counsel tried to play dirty, in negotiations when Vanessa's attorney had attempted to lowball them. Eleanor Chase in battle mode was something to behold. "Sebastian," she said, and he noticed she used his first name rather than the formal Mr. Cross she'd maintained throughout their professional relationship. "This is insane. We have a professional relationship. There are ethics involved." "Boundaries, Sebastian corrected. "We had a professional relationship." Past tense. "The divorce is final. You're no longer my attorney. And the last time I checked, there's no law against taking someone to dinner." He was being unreasonable. He knew. But something about this situation, about her, made him want to push back against the careful walls she'd built. During those 6 months of meetings, he'd caught glimpses of the person behind the professional facade. The way she'd laughed at his terrible jokes when she thought no one was listening. The passion in her voice when she talked about justice and fairness. The midnight emails showing she worked just as obsessively as he did. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue further, but Marcus chose that moment to return with a tray of coffee and water. "Oh," Marcus said, stopping short when he saw Eleanor. "Miss Chase. What a surprise." "Marcus," Eleanor acknowledged with a tight nod. She turned back to Sebastian. "This isn't over. We're going to discuss this when you're sober." She spun on her heel, her emerald dress swirling around her, and walked away with the kind of dignity that made Sebastian's chest ache. He watched her go, something shifting in his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. Eleanor's hands were shaking as she retrieved her coat from the check room. Behind her she could hear Hannah calling her name, but she didn't stop. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to be literally anywhere but in this building where her carefully controlled life had just detonated like a bomb. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, cool and sharp, helping to clear the fog of panic. $5 million. Sebastian Cross had bid $5 million on a date with her. Sebastian Cross, whose messy divorce had consumed half a year of her life. Sebastian Cross, whose pain and anger and vulnerability she'd witnessed in ways that few people ever would. Sebastian Cross, who she'd maybe, possibly against every professional instinct, developed feelings for. No, She shut down that thought immediately. She was good at that, at compartmentalizing, at keeping feelings in their designated boxes. It was what made her an excellent attorney. Emotions were the enemy of clear thinking, and Eleanor had built her career on crystal clear thinking. Eleanor. Wait. Hannah finally caught up to her, slightly breathless from running in heels. I'm so sorry. I thought it would be funny. I thought maybe you'd get bid on for like $500 by some harmless accountant and you'd have a free dinner and a story to tell. I never imagined. She trailed off, apparently unable to find words sufficient to describe the disaster she'd created. Eleanor turned to face her friend. Hannah looked genuinely distressed, her makeup slightly smudged, her carefully styled hair coming loose from its pins. It was hard to stay angry at someone who looked so miserable. $5 million, Hannah, Eleanor said quietly. He bid $5 million. That's not a joke. That's not funny. That's a legally binding commitment. Can't you just give the money back? Hannah suggested weakly. It's for charity, Eleanor pointed out. Children's hospitals. How exactly do I explain that we need to take back $5 million from sick kids because I'm uncomfortable? They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city washing over them. Traffic humming past, distant sirens, the muted thump of music from the hotel ballroom. Eleanor's life had always been orderly. Even her divorce cases, messy as they were, followed predictable patterns: discovery, negotiation, settlement, or trial. Steps in a process. This wasn't a process. This was chaos. He was drunk, Eleanor finally said. He probably won't even remember in the morning. I'll call him tomorrow. We'll sort it out quietly, and this will all become an amusing anecdote we never speak of again. Hannah looked doubtful but nodded. If you say so. Do you want me to come over? We could order actual sushi and watch terrible movies and pretend this night never happened. It was tempting, but Eleanor shook her head. I need to think. I'll call you tomorrow. She hugged Hannah briefly, a silent forgiveness for the disaster, and then walked toward the street to hail a cab. Her apartment in the Upper West Side had never looked more appealing. As she slid into the back of a yellow taxi, Eleanor caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. She looked exactly the same as she had when she'd left her apartment hours ago. Same face, same hair, same person, but something felt different. Something had shifted in a way she couldn't quite name. She gave the driver her address and leaned back against the worn vinyl seat, closing her eyes. 6 months ago, Sebastian Cross had walked into her office with the kind of pain that money couldn't fix. His wife of 8 years had been having an affair with their mutual friend, had been planning to leave for months while pretending everything was fine, had hired a shark of an attorney with the specific goal of taking Sebastian for everything he was worth. Eleanor had seen hundreds of clients over her decade-long career, but Sebastian had been different. Maybe it was because beneath the billionaire exterior, she'd found someone genuine, someone who'd been betrayed by the person he trusted most and was trying to figure out how to put himself back together. Someone who made self-deprecating jokes in the middle of tense negotiations and sent her articles about obscure legal precedents he thought she'd find interesting. Someone who, she'd realized with growing horror around month 3, she was attracted to. Which was absolutely unacceptable. Attorneys didn't get involved with clients. It was Ethics 101, the most basic rule of professional conduct. So she'd buried it, locked it away in a box labeled inappropriate and never to be examined, and had done her job with the fierce competence that had built her reputation. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks ago. Sebastian had sent her a bonus check that had made her accountant literally gasp over the phone, along with a handwritten note that said simply, "Thank you for giving me my life back." She'd framed the note, which was unprofessional and sentimental, and kept it in her desk drawer where she could pretend it didn't make her heart do complicated things. The taxi pulled up in front of her building, and Eleanor paid the driver with cash, tipping generously because the universe owed her something positive today. Her doorman, Victor, greeted her with his usual warm smile. "Good evening, Miss Chase. Enjoy your event?" "It was eventful," Eleanor said, which was possibly the understatement of the century. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Neat, organized, decorated in shades of cream and gray that a designer had once told her were sophisticated and calming. Usually walking through her door felt like exhaling. Tonight, it felt like a museum. Beautiful, but lifeless. She kicked off her heels and immediately felt 2 inches shorter and infinitely more comfortable. The emerald dress came off next, carefully hung in her closet where it would probably stay unworn forever, now forever associated with this disaster of an evening. She changed into her favorite pajamas, soft flannel pants and an oversized law school t-shirt, and padded to her kitchen. Wine seemed appropriate. She poured herself a generous glass of Pinot Grigio and carried it to her living room, curling up on her gray sectional sofa. Through her windows she could see the city lights spreading out like a carpet of stars. Somewhere out there, Sebastian was probably passed out in his penthouse, blissfully unaware of the chaos he'd created. Tomorrow, she'd call him. They'd have a rational conversation between two adults. They'd figure out how to handle the situation with minimal embarrassment for everyone involved. It would be fine. Everything would be fine. Except her phone was buzzing. Eleanor looked at the screen, and her heart stuttered. Sebastian Cross. She stared at the name for a long moment, took a fortifying sip of wine, and answered. "Hello? Eleanor." His voice was clearer than it had been at the hotel, though still rough around the edges. "I owe you an apology." Sebastian was sitting in his home office, a massive space on the top floor of his penthouse that overlooked Central Park, nursing what felt like the beginning of a truly legendary hangover. Marcus had poured him into a car an hour ago, force-fed him water and aspirin, and left him with a lecture about responsible drinking and public behavior that had sounded suspiciously like something Sebastian's mother would have said. Now, alone with his thoughts and the slowly returning clarity of sobriety, Sebastian was faced with the full magnitude of what he'd done. $5 million on a date with Eleanor Chase, his divorce attorney. A woman who had maintained strict professional boundaries for 6 months despite the fact that Sebastian had been halfway in love with her by the end of the second month. "I owe you an apology," he repeated when Eleanor didn't respond immediately. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could imagine her in whatever she wore when she wasn't being formidable attorney Eleanor Chase. "Sebastian," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "we need to discuss this situation rationally." "I know," he agreed. "That's why I'm calling. While I'm still somewhat drunk, but increasingly aware of the disaster I've created." He heard what might have been a laugh, quickly stifled. "Somewhat drunk isn't the same as sober," Eleanor pointed out. "We should have this conversation tomorrow. If we wait until tomorrow, you'll have all night to build your case for why this needs to be canceled," Sebastian said. "And you're an excellent attorney, Eleanor. You'll have arguments I can't counter. So I'm calling now, while we're both off balance, to tell you that I don't want to cancel it." Silence on the other end. Sebastian pressed forward. "I bid $5 million. Yes, I was drunk. Yes, it was impulsive. Yes, it's probably the most expensive date in human history, but the money's going to children's hospitals and He paused, trying to find the right words. "I'd like to take you to dinner." "This is insane," Eleanor said, but her voice had lost some of its sharp edges. "We had a professional relationship. You were vulnerable, going through a divorce. I was your attorney. There are power dynamics and ethical considerations and about 17 different reasons why this is a terrible idea." "Had," Sebastian emphasized, echoing his earlier point. Past tense. "The divorce is final. You're not my attorney anymore. And for the record, I was never vulnerable because of the divorce. I was vulnerable because I spent 6 months sitting across from you pretending I didn't notice that you're brilliant and funny and the most beautiful woman I've ever met." The words hung in the air between them. Sebastian could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of his confession settling like snow. He'd just laid his cards on the table, violated every rule of cool business negotiation he'd ever learned, but he was tired of walls and pretending and carefully managed images. Vanessa had taught him that protecting yourself meant missing out on everything real. Sebastian, Eleanor's voice was soft now, almost fragile. "You don't know what you're saying. You've had a traumatic year. The divorce, the media attention, everything with Vanessa. You're confusing gratitude with attraction." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Sebastian insisted. "And I know the difference between gratitude and attraction. I'm grateful to my accountant too, but I've never noticed the way his eyes light up when he's winning an argument or thought about what it would be like to make him laugh." He could hear her breath catch, and he pressed on. "One date, Eleanor. That's all I'm asking. One evening where we're not attorney and client, where we can just be two people having dinner. If at the end of the night you want to walk away and never see me again, I'll respect that. But don't decide based on fear of what might happen. Decide based on what you actually want." The silence stretched so long Sebastian thought she might have hung up. Then, quietly, almost too quietly to hear, Eleanor said, "I'll think about it." It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't refusal either. It was possibility, and right now, possibility felt like everything. "Thank you," Sebastian said. "Get some sleep, Eleanor. We'll talk tomorrow. Good night, Sebastian." The call ended, and Sebastian set his phone down on his desk, staring out at the city lights. He should feel anxious, he thought. He'd just confessed feelings for someone who might reject him completely. But instead, he felt lighter than he had in months. Honest. Real. Like he'd finally stopped performing and started living. His marriage to Vanessa had been a performance from the start. He could see that now. They'd looked perfect on paper. The tech genius and the socialite. The billionaire power couple, but looking perfect and being happy were entirely different things. Vanessa had wanted the lifestyle, the status, the ability to move through society as Mrs. Sebastian Cross. She'd never wanted him. Not really. Not the person who got obsessive about code, who made terrible puns, who preferred quiet dinners to celebrity galas. Eleanor had seen all of those things during their 6 months working together. She'd seen him at his worst, angry and hurt, and trying to understand how his marriage had fallen apart. She'd never judged him for it, never treated him like damaged goods or a checkbook with legs. She'd fought for him because she believed in justice, in fairness, in making sure the person who had been betrayed didn't get victimized twice by the system. And maybe, just maybe, she'd felt the same pull he had during those long meetings, those midnight email exchanges, those moments when their eyes met across a conference table, and something electric passed between them. Or maybe he was reading too much into everything, seeing what he wanted to see because he was lonely and lost and desperate for connection. Sebastian rubbed his eyes, the headache pulsing harder now. Tomorrow would bring clarity or disaster, possibly both. For tonight, he'd said what needed saying. The rest was up to Eleanor. Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Sebastian's words on an endless loop. "I was never vulnerable because of the divorce. I was vulnerable because I spent 6 months sitting across from you pretending I didn't notice that you're brilliant and funny and the most beautiful woman I've ever met. It was the kind of confession that changed things, that made it impossible to pretend feelings didn't exist." She'd spent 6 months carefully maintaining professional distance, telling herself her attraction to Sebastian was just a passing thing, a symptom of spending too much time together in intense circumstances. But here, alone in the dark, she could be honest with herself. She'd looked forward to every meeting, had found excuses to send him articles and updates that could have waited, had felt a little thrill every time his name appeared in her inbox. She'd told herself it was just good professional rapport. But good professional rapport didn't make your heart race, didn't make you wonder what someone's laugh sounded like when they weren't in a conference room. Didn't make you notice the exact shade of someone's eyes or the way they gestured when they were excited about an idea. At 3 in the morning, Eleanor gave up on sleep and moved to her home office. If her brain was going to race anyway, she might as well be productive. She had other cases, other clients whose lives needed organizing, but every time she tried to focus on a brief or a deposition transcript, her mind wandered back to Sebastian. One date. He'd asked for one date. It seemed like such a small thing, but Eleanor knew better. One date meant crossing a line she'd never crossed before. She'd had relationships, of course, a handful of boyfriends over the years, even a semi-serious engagement in law school that had fizzled when both of them realized they were more in love with their careers than each other. But she'd never dated a former client. Never even been tempted to. The rules existed for good reasons: power imbalances, complicated emotions, potential exploitation. Except none of those things applied here. Sebastian wasn't vulnerable anymore. The divorce was settled. She wasn't his attorney. They were just two people who happened to know each other's worst moments, and somehow still liked each other. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, painting her office in shades of gold and pink, Eleanor had made a decision. It terrified her. This decision, it went against every careful instinct she'd cultivated over a decade of practicing law. But somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, she'd realized that Sebastian was right about one thing. She was deciding based on fear rather than desire, and that was no way to live. She picked up her phone and typed out a message before she could change her mind. One date. But we do this properly, not as a spectacle, not as some charity obligation. Just dinner, just conversation, just us. She hit send before she could overthink it, then immediately wanted to unsend it. But the message was delivered, read receipt showing almost instantly despite the early hour. 3 dots appeared. Sebastian typing a response. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Just us. His message came through. I know a place. Quiet. Private. Excellent food. Saturday night? Saturday was 4 days away. 4 days to panic, to change her mind, to remember all the reasons this was complicated. 4 days to anticipate, to wonder, to feel alive in a way she hadn't in longer than she cared to admit. Saturday works, Eleanor typed. 7 o'clock? Perfect. I'll send a car. I can meet you there. A pause then, Eleanor. Let me do this right. Please, she smiled despite herself. Fine. 7 o'clock. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. Eleanor went through her normal Friday routine on autopilot, reviewing case files, meeting with clients, returning calls. But part of her brain remained fixated on Saturday night, spinning out scenarios ranging from wonderful to disastrous. By 5 o'clock, she gave up on productivity and decided to head home early, something she almost never did. Her assistant, Jennifer, looked up in surprise when Eleanor announced she was leaving. Are you feeling all right? Jennifer asked with genuine concern. You never leave before 7. I'm fine, Eleanor assured her. Just a long week. I'll work from home this weekend if anything urgent comes up. The subway ride home was packed with Friday evening commuters, everyone looking slightly haggard and desperate for the weekend. Eleanor stood pressed against a pole, swaying with the train's movement, surrounded by strangers living their own complicated lives. How many of them were dealing with situations as absurd as hers? She wondered. Probably more than she'd think. Life had a way of being stranger than any fiction. Her phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. Lunch tomorrow? I need to hear how the aftermath is going. Eleanor considered declining, but Hannah deserved an update after creating this situation. Noon. That Italian place you like. Can't wait. So much to discuss. Eleanor smiled. Hannah was going to lose her mind when she heard about the date. Back in her apartment, Eleanor did something she rarely allowed herself. She obsessed. She stood in front of her closet, actually considering what she might wear on Saturday. This was ridiculous. She was a grown woman with a law degree and a stellar career. She shouldn't be standing here mentally cataloging dresses like a teenager before prom, but she was. Because this wasn't just any date. This was Sebastian Cross. This was 6 months of repressed feelings suddenly given permission to exist. This was scary and exciting and potentially the worst decision she'd ever made or the best one. Only time would tell which. Sebastian spent Friday morning in back-to-back meetings with his executive team, discussing the rollout of their latest AI platform. But his mind kept wandering. His CTO noticed first. "Seb, did you hear the question?" Sebastian blinked, pulling himself back to the present. "Sorry, what?" Marcus, sitting to his right, kicked him under the table. Hard. "We were discussing the European market strategy," his CTO repeated patiently. "Specifically whether we should prioritize Germany or France for the initial launch." "Germany," Sebastian said, forcing himself to focus. "Better infrastructure. More receptive corporate culture for enterprise AI adoption. France will follow once we establish case studies." The meeting continued, but Sebastian could feel Marcus's eyes on him. His best friend knew something was up. After all, Sebastian didn't zone out during strategic planning meetings. Ever. When they finally broke for lunch, Marcus cornered him in Sebastian's office. "All right, what's going on?" Marcus demanded. "You've been distracted all morning. Is this about the auction? Did Miss Chase threaten to sue you or something?" "She agreed to the date," Sebastian said, unable to keep the slight smile off his face. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "She what?" "She agreed. We're having dinner tomorrow night." Sebastian dropped into his desk chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the decision. "I may have completely lost my mind." Marcus sat down across from him, studying Sebastian with the frank assessment that came from 20 years of friendship dating back to their college days. "You like her," Marcus said finally. It wasn't a question. "I like her," Sebastian confirmed. "Have for months, since about the third meeting, when she eviscerated Vanessa's attorney's motion so thoroughly that he actually stuttered during the hearing." "That was pretty spectacular," Marcus agreed. Then his expression turned serious. "But Seb, are you sure about this? You're barely 6 months out from your divorce. Vanessa did a number on you. Maybe jumping into something new isn't the best idea right now." It was a fair point, a logical point. Sebastian should probably listen to it. "Maybe it's not," Sebastian acknowledged. "Maybe this is rebound behavior, or misplaced gratitude, or any of the other perfectly rational explanations for why I shouldn't be doing this. But, Mark, I spent 8 years in a marriage where I was never quite enough, never quite successful enough, never quite attentive enough, never quite whatever Vanessa needed me to be that particular day. And then I spent 6 months with someone who looked at me like I was exactly enough, just as I was. So maybe it's stupid, maybe it's too soon. But I'm going to take this chance. Because if I don't, I'll always wonder." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but if this goes south and you end up hurt again, I reserve the right to say, 'I told you so.'" "Noted," Sebastian said with a slight smile. "Now help me figure out what restaurant to take her to. It needs to be perfect." They spent the next hour researching options. Sebastian wanted somewhere elegant but not showy, romantic but not overwhelming, private enough for real conversation but public enough to be appropriate for a first date. Finally, Marcus suggested Le Bernardin's private dining room. "Good food, excellent service, completely private," Marcus said. "You can have an actual conversation without being photographed or overheard or turned into a gossip column item." It was perfect. Sebastian made the reservation personally, calling in a favor with the owner to secure the space on short notice. Then he spent Friday afternoon doing something he hadn't done in years: shopping for himself. Not having an assistant order clothes, not grabbing whatever was hanging in his closet, but actually walking into stores and selecting an outfit for a date. It felt simultaneously ridiculous and thrilling. He settled on a navy blue suit, well-tailored but not too formal, with a white shirt and no tie, approachable but put together. At least, that's what the very patient sales associate had assured him after Sebastian had tried on approximately 12 different combinations. Saturday morning arrived too slowly and too quickly at the same time. Sebastian woke at 6, his usual time, and went for a run through Central Park despite the October chill. Running had always been his thinking time, when solutions to complex problems would surface while his body was occupied with physical exertion. Today, no solutions materialized. Just a persistent question. What if this was a mistake? What if Eleanor showed up out of obligation rather than genuine interest? What if the chemistry he'd felt during their professional relationship had been entirely one-sided, a product of his own loneliness and need? He showered after the run, then faced the longest day of his life. He tried to work, but code that usually absorbed his attention completely felt impossible to focus on. He tried to read, but the words on the page might as well have been in Sanskrit for all the meaning he could extract from them. Finally, at 4 o'clock, he gave up on productivity entirely and started getting ready. By 6:30, Sebastian was dressed, had checked his appearance approximately 40 times in the mirror, and was pacing his penthouse like a caged tiger. The car was scheduled to pick up Eleanor at her apartment at 6:45. The restaurant reservation was for 7:30, giving them time to settle in without rushing. His phone buzzed at 6:53. The driver, confirming that Eleanor was in the car and they were en route to the restaurant. Sebastian's heart rate kicked up several notches. This was happening. He was actually doing this. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, his palms slightly sweaty in a way they hadn't been since his first major investor pitch a decade ago. The drive to Les Bernardines took only 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sebastian arrived first, which had been his plan. He wanted to be there when Eleanor walked in, wanted to see her reaction to the space he'd chosen. The private dining room was perfect. Intimate but not cramped, with soft lighting and a single table set for two. A window overlooked the city, providing a view without the distraction of other diners. The sommelier had already decanted the wine Sebastian had selected, a 2015 Chateau Margaux that he remembered Eleanor mentioning she loved during one of their meetings. He'd stored that information away without conscious intention. The way you remember everything about someone who matters. At 7:30 exactly, there was a soft knock on the door. Sebastian's breath caught as Eleanor walked in. She was wearing a midnight blue dress, simple and elegant, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in her usual professional style. She looked nervous and beautiful and absolutely worth every moment of anticipation. "Hi," she said, and Sebastian was struck by how different her voice sounded outside the conference room. Softer, less guarded. "Hi," he replied, moving forward to greet her. "You look stunning." Eleanor smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You don't look so bad yourself." The first awkward moment of any date. The uncertainty of whether to hug or shake hands or just stand there. They split the difference. A brief embrace that was more than professional, but less than intimate. Eleanor smelled like jasmine and something else Sebastian couldn't quite name. Something that was just her. Wine? Sebastian offered, gesturing to the table. "I remembered you mentioned loving Margaux." Eleanor felt some of her nervousness dissipate as she settled into her chair. Sebastian had paid attention, had remembered an offhand comment she'd made months ago about wine preferences. It was the kind of detail that mattered, that showed care and thought beyond the grand gesture of a $5 million bid. The sommelier poured wine for both of them, then discreetly disappeared, leaving them alone in the private dining room. Eleanor took a sip, letting the rich, complex flavors settle on her tongue. "This is exceptional," she said. "And this space is perfect. How did you manage a reservation here on such short notice?" Sebastian smiled, a bit sheepish. "Called in a favor. The owner's daughter used software my company developed for her startup. I may have expedited some features for her in exchange for tonight." Eleanor laughed, surprised by how easily it came. So you're not above a little quid pro quo when it suits you? Absolutely not, Sebastian confirmed. I'm a businessman. Everything's negotiable. But his expression turned more serious as he added, except this. Tonight isn't a negotiation or a transaction. It's just us. Like you said, no obligations, no expectations beyond good food, and hopefully good conversation. It was exactly what Eleanor needed to hear. The pressure she'd been feeling, the weight of the $5 million bid, and the professional complications and all the reasons this shouldn't be happening, began to lift. This was just dinner. Just two people getting to know each other outside the constraints of attorney-client privilege. Their first course arrived. Oysters with a champagne mignonette, delicate and perfect. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Eleanor had anticipated. They talked about everything except the divorce, except work, except all the complicated history that had brought them to this table. Sebastian told her about growing up in Seattle, the son of two teachers who had been baffled but supportive when their kid had turned out to be a tech prodigy. They still don't really understand what I do, Sebastian admitted, with a laugh. My mom thinks I'm good with computers. My dad tells people I work with the internet. They're not wrong, technically, but the specifics elude them. Eleanor found herself telling him about her own childhood in Boston, raised by a single mother who had worked 3 jobs to put Eleanor through private school. She was determined that I'd have opportunities she didn't, Eleanor said. Education was everything to her. Still is. When I graduated from law school, she cried for about an hour straight. Happy tears, but still. It was overwhelming. She must be proud of what you've built, Sebastian said. Eleanor nodded. She is. Though she'd also like me to work less and date more, ironically. The words hung in the air for a moment, the acknowledgement that Eleanor's personal life had been sacrificed on the altar of professional success. Why don't you? Sebastian asked gently. Date more, I mean. It can't be for lack of opportunity. Eleanor considered the question as their second course arrived, perfectly seared scallops on a bed of cauliflower pure. Honestly? Because most dates feel like another negotiation. Everyone's performing, trying to present their best selves, hiding the complicated bits. It's exhausting, and I spend all day dealing with the aftermath of failed relationships, which doesn't exactly make me optimistic about finding a successful one. That's bleak, Sebastian observed. Is it? I'm a divorce attorney. I see marriages fall apart for a living. I see people who promised forever turn into strangers who hate each other. I see assets divided, and children fought over and love turned into legal proceedings. It's not conducive to romantic optimism. Sebastian set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. But you must also see the relief, don't you? The people who leave bad situations and get a chance to start over. The people who realize they're worth more than what they were settling for. It was a perspective Eleanor hadn't quite considered, at least not framed that way. I suppose I do, she admitted. Is that how you felt, when the divorce was final? She probably shouldn't ask that question, should maintain some boundary between tonight and their professional history. But she genuinely wanted to know. Sebastian took a moment to answer, swirling the wine in his glass. Relief, definitely, but also sadness, even though I was the one who wanted out. 8 years is a long time to spend with someone, even if it wasn't right. And there was guilt, too, which I know is irrational. Vanessa was the one who had the affair, who checked out of the marriage emotionally years before physically leaving. But I still felt like I'd failed somehow. Eleanor understood that feeling. She'd seen it in dozens of clients, the way even the wronged party often blamed themselves. You didn't fail, she said firmly. Vanessa made choices. You can't control other people's choices. You can only control your response to them. That's very lawyerly advice, Sebastian said with a slight smile. Is that what you told me during our sessions? More or less, Eleanor admitted, though usually with more legal jargon and citation of case law. They both laughed, and Eleanor felt the last of her nervousness fade away. This was nice. This was easy in a way she hadn't expected. The main course arrived, and they fell into comfortable silence for a few moments, enjoying food that was genuinely exceptional. Then Sebastian asked, "Why did you become a divorce attorney? That's not usually someone's dream career path." Eleanor paused, considering how much to reveal. But something about this evening, about Sebastian, made her want to be honest. "My father left when I was 5, she said quietly. Just walked out one day. No explanation, no forwarding address, no child support. My mother had to fight for everything: custody, support, even just the right to know where he'd gone. She couldn't afford a good attorney, so she got steamrolled by the system and by my father's family's lawyers. By the time everything was settled, we'd lost almost everything." Sebastian's expression shifted to something like anger on her behalf. "That's terrible." "It shaped me," Eleanor said, "made me determined that no one else would go through what my mother did if I could help it. So I went to law school specifically to practice family law, to be the attorney my mother needed and didn't have, to make sure that people going through the worst time of their lives have someone fighting for them who actually gives a damn." "You do give a damn," Sebastian said softly. "That was obvious from the first meeting. You weren't just doing a job. You were invested." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest, something that had nothing to do with the wine. "Your case mattered to me," she admitted, "more than most." The confession lingered between them, changing the atmosphere in the room. They'd crossed another line, Eleanor realized, moving from professional courtesy to personal admission. Sebastian reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers, a question rather than a demand. Eleanor made the decision, closing the small distance and letting their fingers intertwine. His hand was warm, slightly calloused in a way that surprised her. She'd expected softness from a billionaire who worked primarily with computers, but his running habit had left its mark. "I need to tell you something," Sebastian said. "Something I should have said earlier, before tonight, but I was afraid it would make you say no to dinner." Eleanor's heart rate picked up. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just honest," Sebastian assured her. "The drunk bidding wasn't entirely accidental. I mean, I didn't intend to bid $5 million specifically. That was definitely the alcohol. But when I heard them announce a mystery date, something in me decided to bid. Before I even knew it was you. I think some part of me wanted an excuse, any excuse to step outside the boundaries we'd maintained for 6 months." Eleanor absorbed this, the implication that even drunk, Sebastian had been drawn to the possibility of connection. "So you're saying you subconsciously manifested a $5 million date with your former attorney? When you put it that way, it sounds insane," Sebastian said with a self-deprecating laugh. "But yes, essentially, though finding out it was you specifically felt like the universe either has a great sense of humor or was finally cutting me a break." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "For what it's worth, I almost didn't come tonight. Changed my mind about 12 times between yesterday and this afternoon." "What made you decide to come?" Sebastian asked. Eleanor considered the question. She could give a safe answer, something about honoring commitments or supporting charity. But they'd moved past safe. "Honestly, because I realized I was making decisions based on fear rather than desire. And I've built my whole life on being fearless in every other arena." It seemed cowardly to suddenly become cautious just because the stakes were personal instead of professional. Sebastian's expression softened. "You're not fearless, Eleanor. You're brave. There's a difference. Fearless people don't feel the fear. Brave people feel it and do the thing anyway." It was such a simple distinction, but it struck Eleanor as profoundly true. She wasn't fearless. She was terrified right now, actually. Terrified of getting hurt, of compromising her professional reputation, of wanting something that might not work out. But she was here anyway, holding Sebastian's hand, having this conversation. That was bravery, wasn't it? Dessert arrived. A chocolate souffle that smelled like heaven. They released hands to eat, but the connection remained. Eleanor found herself telling Sebastian things she rarely discussed. Her anxiety about being good enough. The imposter syndrome that occasionally surfaced despite her success. The way she sometimes felt like she was playing a role called successful attorney Eleanor, rather than actually being herself. Sebastian listened with an attention that felt rare in Eleanor's experience, not waiting for his turn to talk, not offering unsolicited advice, just genuinely hearing what she was saying. When she finished, he shared his own version, the pressure of being Sebastian Cross, tech billionaire, the way his wealth had turned him into a symbol rather than a person in most interactions, the isolation that came from never knowing if people liked him or his bank account. That's why the divorce was so devastating, Sebastian admitted, not just because Vanessa cheated, but because I'd believed she was one of the few people who saw me rather than the money. Finding out I was wrong about that even someone I'd married had been more interested in the lifestyle than the person, it fundamentally shook my ability to trust my own judgment. Eleanor understood that kind of betrayal. But you're trying again anyway, she pointed out, being here tonight, being vulnerable with me. That takes courage too. Or stupidity, Sebastian said with a slight smile. The jury's still out. They finished dessert, the souffle disappearing far too quickly for something so delicious. The sommelier appeared to refill their wine glasses, but Sebastian declined with a meaningful look at Eleanor. I want to remember every moment of tonight, he explained. And I've learned my lesson about making important decisions while drunk. Eleanor smiled, warmth flooding through her. The evening was winding down, she realized, with something like disappointment. The plates were cleared, the wine glasses removed, the table bare except for the flickering candles. Walk with me? Sebastian suggested. It's a beautiful night, and I'm not ready for this to end yet. Eleanor considered. Walking meant extending the date, spending more time together, delaying the inevitable moment when she'd have to decide what happened next. It was also exactly what she wanted. I'd like that, she said. They left Le Bernardin through a private exit, Sebastian's security team maintaining a discreet distance. The October night was cool, but not cold, that perfect autumn temperature that made everything feel crisp and possible. They walked toward Central Park, their shoulders occasionally brushing, not quite holding hands but maintaining constant physical awareness of each other. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Eleanor said impulsively. Sebastian glanced at her, surprised. That's a dangerous question. I like dangerous questions. They're the only ones worth asking. Sebastian was quiet for a moment, their footsteps echoing on the pavement. Then he said, I'm thinking about stepping back from the company. Not leaving entirely, but moving to more of a strategic advisor role rather than CEO. I'm tired of the constant pressure, the endless meetings, the feeling that every decision affects thousands of employees and millions of users. I want to build things again, write code, work on problems that interest me rather than problems that matter to shareholders. Eleanor heard the weight in his voice, the admission of something he clearly hadn't voiced before. Have you told Marcus? You're bored? No, Sebastian admitted. Because saying it out loud makes it real, and making it real means disappointing people who expect me to be Sebastian Cross, visionary CEO, forever. But the truth is, I'm not sure I want to be that person anymore. I'm not sure I ever really wanted to be him. I just sort of became him and didn't know how to stop. Eleanor slipped her hand into his, a gesture of support and understanding. Who do you want to be instead? Honestly? I have no idea, Sebastian said with a laugh. Which is terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Maybe just Sebastian. Not Sebastian Cross. Not the CEO. Not the billionaire. Just a guy who likes code and running, and apparently expensive charity auction dates. They'd reached the edge of Central Park, the trees rustling in the light breeze. Sebastian stopped walking and turned to face Eleanor fully. Your turn. Tell me something you've never told anyone. Eleanor's mind raced. What could she offer that matched his vulnerability? Then she knew. "I'm lonely," she said quietly. "I've built this incredible career, achieved everything I set out to accomplish, proven that I'm just as good as any attorney at the top firms. But at the end of the day, I go home to an empty apartment and eat takeout alone and wonder if I've been so busy winning that I forgot to actually live." The confession hung between them in the cool night air. Sebastian's expression shifted, something tender and understanding crossing his features. "We're quite a pair," he said softly. "The lonely billionaire and the isolated attorney. We could start a support group." Eleanor laughed despite the heaviness of the moment. "We'd be the world's most exclusive support group." Membership. 2. "Sometimes 2 is enough," Sebastian said. He raised his hand to her face, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, caring, full of unspoken possibility. Eleanor's breath caught. They were standing at a precipice, she realized. Everything up until now had been dinner, conversation, getting to know each other. What happened next would determine whether this was a single evening or the beginning of something more. "Sebastian," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to know that if we do this, if we move forward from tonight, it can't be half measures. I don't do casual well. I'm either all in or I'm out. And given our history, given the complications, I need to know you're sure that this isn't just rebound behavior or loneliness or gratitude dressed up as attraction." Sebastian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer until they were mere inches apart, until Eleanor could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I'm not sure of many things," he said quietly. "I'm not sure where my career is going or what the next year holds, or how to navigate life after divorce. But I'm absolutely sure about this. You matter to me. You've mattered to me since you called out my tendency to blame myself during our third meeting and told me to stop playing the victim in my own story. You matter in a way that has nothing to do with loneliness or rebounds or gratitude." It was the answer Eleanor needed. Not a declaration of forever, but an acknowledgement of genuine feeling, of intentionality. She closed the remaining distance between them and kissed him. It started gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Sebastian's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened. Eleanor felt like she was falling and flying simultaneously, every nerve ending suddenly alive and aware. This was dangerous, her lawyer brain whispered. This was complicated and potentially messy and could end badly. But her heart, the part of herself she'd kept so carefully guarded for so long, didn't care about danger or complications. Her heart was already all in. They broke apart eventually, both slightly breathless. Sebastian rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That was worth $5 million, he murmured. Eleanor laughed, the sound escaping before she could stop it. "That's a terrible return on investment. I should probably kiss you at least 400 more times to make it economically viable. I'm absolutely willing to let you try," Sebastian said, opening his eyes. The look in them made Eleanor's stomach flip, want and affection, and something deeper. Something that looked dangerously like the beginning of love. They walked back to where Sebastian's car was waiting, hands intertwined, neither willing to break the physical connection. At the car, Eleanor faced a decision. Go home alone, end the evening on a high note, maintain some boundaries, or accept Sebastian's unspoken invitation to continue the night. "Come back to my place," Sebastian said, making the invitation explicit. "Just to talk, just to not end this evening yet. I promise to be a perfect gentleman." Eleanor studied his face, looking for any sign of pressure or expectation. She found none, just hope and honesty. "Okay," she said. "But I'm holding you to that gentleman promise." The drive to Sebastian's penthouse was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor texted Hannah a quick update. "Still alive. Date going well. We'll call tomorrow." knowing her friend was probably pacing her apartment waiting for news. Sebastian's home was stunning in an understated way. Eleanor had expected ostentation, the kind of over-the-top wealth display that many billionaires favored. Instead, she found clean lines, comfortable furniture, walls lined with bookshelves rather than expensive art. It felt like a home rather than a showplace. "Drink?" Sebastian offered, heading toward what appeared to be a well-stocked bar area. "Water would be great, actually," Eleanor said. The wine from dinner was making her pleasantly buzzed, but she wanted to stay clear-headed for whatever conversations the rest of the evening held. Sebastian returned with 2 glasses of water and gestured toward the living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, light stretching out in every direction like a carpet of stars. Eleanor moved to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass. "This view is incredible," she said. Sebastian came to stand beside her. "It's the main reason I bought this place. When work gets overwhelming or I need perspective, I come here and look at this. It reminds me that I'm just a small part of something much larger, that my problems, however big they feel, are just tiny pieces of a massive, complicated world." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, just watching the city. Then Eleanor asked the question that had been nagging at her since dinner. "What happens now? After tonight?" Sebastian turned to look at her. "What do you want to happen?" It was a fair counter-question. Eleanor had to think about it, had to be honest with herself about what she was willing to risk. "I want to see where this goes," she said finally. "But slowly, carefully. I want to get to know you outside of crisis and legal proceedings. I want to see who Sebastian is when he's not fighting for his freedom from a bad marriage. And I want you to get to know me when I'm not in attorney mode, fighting battles and winning arguments." "That sounds reasonable," Sebastian said, "and terrifying. Getting to know someone, really know them, means they get to see all the parts you usually hide." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "It does. But I think maybe we've already seen some of those parts. We just haven't acknowledged them in this context." Sebastian smiled, reaching out to take her hand again. "When can I see you again? Are you free Tuesday?" Eleanor asked. "I have a client meeting that should wrap up by 6. We could grab dinner somewhere casual. Maybe you could show me one of those holes in the wall you probably know about despite being a billionaire." "I know an excellent ramen place in the East Village," Sebastian offered. "The owner doesn't care who I am. The food is incredible, and the atmosphere is decidedly unfancy." "Perfect," Eleanor said. "It's a date." They talked for another hour, curled up on Sebastian's comfortable sofa, discussing everything from their favorite books to their most embarrassing childhood memories. Eleanor learned that Sebastian had been obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid and could still name an encyclopedic number of species. Sebastian learned that Eleanor had briefly considered becoming a pianist before law school, and still played when she was stressed. Around midnight, Eleanor reluctantly announced she should probably head home. She had client meetings in the morning, and staying much longer risked falling asleep on Sebastian's very comfortable sofa. Sebastian called his driver, insisting on having Eleanor taken home safely. "I had an amazing time tonight," Eleanor said as they waited for the car to arrive. "Thank you for dinner, for the conversation, for being exactly who you are." "Thank you for saying yes," Sebastian replied, "for giving this a chance despite all the very valid reasons you could have said no." The car arrived, and they shared one more kiss goodbye, softer than the first but no less meaningful. Eleanor settled into the back seat, watching Sebastian's building disappear as the car pulled into traffic. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Sebastian. "Already missing you. Is that pathetically soon?" Eleanor smiled, typing back, "Only if it's pathetic that I'm already missing you too." She spent the ride home replaying the evening in her mind, examining each moment like a jeweler inspecting a precious stone. By any objective measure, this was still complicated. They had history, professional connections, completely different lifestyles, but subjectively, sitting in the back of a car with the taste of Sebastian's kiss still on her lips and the warmth of his attention still glowing in her chest, it felt like the least complicated thing in the world. Sunday morning, Eleanor met Hannah for brunch as promised. Her friend took one look at Eleanor's face and practically squealed. "Oh my God, you slept with him." "I did not sleep with him," Eleanor corrected, though she couldn't keep the smile off her face. "We had dinner, talked, kissed, and then I went home like a responsible adult." Hannah looked disappointed. "That's very restrained of you, also very unlike you. Usually, you're all caution and rules." This new spontaneous Eleanor is interesting. Eleanor sipped her mimosa considering her friend's observation. Maybe I'm tired of being cautious. Maybe watching other people's relationships fall apart for a decade has made me realize that the safe choice is just another way of being afraid. "That's very philosophical, for 10 in the morning, Hannah said. "But I like it. So what's next? Are you seeing him again?" Tuesday. Eleanor confirmed. Casual dinner. Getting to know each other better. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor and Sebastian fell into a pattern. Tuesday dinners became Thursday dinners, which became weekend brunches and Wednesday lunch meetings when their schedules aligned. They moved carefully, both aware of the fragility of new relationships, both carrying their own baggage and fears. Sebastian introduced Eleanor to his world gradually. The corner ramen shop gave way to his favorite bookstore, which led to a jazz club he frequented, and a hiking trail in upstate New York where he went, when Manhattan became too much. Eleanor reciprocated, showing Sebastian her favorite museum, the legal aid clinic where she volunteered twice a month, the park where she ran every morning before work. They talked about everything: politics, philosophy, their worst dating stories, their hopes for the future. They also learned each other's quirks and complications. Sebastian's need for solitude when working on difficult problems. Eleanor's tendency to work too much when stressed. The way Sebastian sometimes got distant when thinking about his failed marriage. The way Eleanor occasionally became defensive when feeling vulnerable. But they talked about these things, worked through them, committed to honesty even when it was uncomfortable. 2 months in, Eleanor brought Sebastian to meet her mother over Thanksgiving weekend. Maria Chase was a force of nature packed into a 5'2" frame, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and opinions she felt no need to soften. "So you're the billionaire," Maria said upon meeting Sebastian, looking him up and down like a general inspecting troops. "Yes, ma'am," Sebastian said, wisely not attempting charm or deflection. "I hope that's not a problem." Maria considered this. "My daughter didn't become a hotshot lawyer by caring about bank accounts. She cares about character. So the question is, do you have any?" It was a test, Eleanor knew. Her mother had never approved of any of Eleanor's previous boyfriends, finding them all lacking in various ways. Sebastian took the question seriously. "I'd like to think so. But character isn't something you can really claim about yourself. It's proven through actions over time. What I can tell you is that I care deeply about your daughter. She's the most remarkable person I've ever met, and I'm trying every day to be worthy of her attention. Whether that demonstrates character or just good taste, I'll leave for you to decide." Maria's stern expression cracked slightly, a hint of a smile appearing. "Good answer. Eleanor, you can keep this one. For now." The dinner went better than Eleanor had dared hope. Maria regaled Sebastian with embarrassing childhood stories that Eleanor protested were unnecessary, and Sebastian charmed her mother with genuine interest and respect rather than the superficial flattery she hated. As they left, Maria pulled Eleanor aside. "He's different from the others," she said quietly. "He looks at you like you're the whole world. Don't let this one go." Eleanor hugged her mother tightly. "I'll try not to." December brought its own challenges. The holidays were difficult for Sebastian, his first Christmas post-divorce, navigating family gatherings alone and confronting the ghost of traditions that no longer existed. Eleanor found herself in the unexpected role of being someone's support system rather than just their attorney. It was different, more intimate, requiring emotional availability she'd spent years avoiding in her professional life. But she showed up for Sebastian during the hard days, held him when he needed holding, listened when he needed to talk about the grief of endings and the fear of beginnings. And Sebastian did the same for her, understanding that Eleanor's fierce independence was sometimes armor against feeling abandoned, recognizing when she needed space and when she needed connection. On New Year's Eve, they found themselves back at the Grand Meridian Hotel for another charity event, this one without the auction that had started everything. "Should we bid on anything tonight?" Sebastian asked with a grin as they entered the ballroom. "I have $5 million burning a hole in my pocket." Eleanor laughed, shaking her head. "I think one dramatically expensive auction moment is enough for any relationship. Let's keep it reasonable tonight." They danced as midnight approached, swaying together to music provided by a live orchestra. Eleanor was acutely aware of how much had changed since that night in October when Hannah's well-meaning interference had collided with Sebastian's drunken generosity. What had seemed like a disaster at the time had become the beginning of something she'd never expected to find. A partner who understood her drive without resenting it, who challenged her to be more than just her career, who made her laugh and think and feel in ways she'd stopped believing were possible. "What are you thinking about?" Sebastian asked, his breath warm against her ear as they moved to the slow rhythm of the music. "How weird life is," Eleanor said. "How a terrible decision made while drunk and a charity auction item signed up for as a joke somehow led to this. To us. The randomness of it all is kind of terrifying." "Or maybe it wasn't random," Sebastian suggested. "Maybe the universe has a plan, and we were too busy being scared and professional to see it. Maybe getting drunk was the only way I could get past my own anxiety enough to take a risk." Eleanor pulled back slightly to look at him. "Are you saying fate brought us together through the medium of expensive champagne and questionable decision-making?" "I'm saying I don't care how we got here," Sebastian replied. "I'm just grateful we did." The countdown to midnight began, voices around them rising in excitement. 10, 9, 8. Eleanor looked around the ballroom, at the glittering dresses and designer tuxedos, at the wealth and privilege on display. 7, 6, 5. A year ago, she would have felt separate from all this, an observer rather than a participant. 4, 3, 2. But Sebastian's arms around her, his heartbeat steady against her chest, made her feel like she belonged exactly where she was. 1. "Happy New Year," Sebastian said, kissing her as cheers erupted around them. "Happy New Year," Eleanor replied, kissing him back with the certainty that this year would be fundamentally different from all the ones before it. In February, Sebastian made his announcement he was stepping back from the CEO position at his company, moving to chairman of the board and chief innovation officer. The press had a field day with speculation about his reasons, ranging from reasonable to absurd. But Sebastian ignored the noise, focused instead on building the life he actually wanted rather than the one he'd stumbled into. Eleanor was there when he cleaned out his office, boxing up a decade of accumulated achievements and moving into a smaller space designed for creative work rather than administrative leadership. "Any regrets?" she asked as Sebastian packed the last box. "Not even a little," he said. "I should have done this years ago. But I guess I needed to be ready, and I wasn't ready until I met someone who made me want to build a life instead of just a career." In March, Eleanor made her own announcement. She was starting her own firm. No more answering to senior partners who cared more about billable hours than actual justice. No more taking cases she didn't believe in because they were profitable. Just Eleanor and carefully selected associates, doing the work that mattered. Sebastian was her first investor, a fact that made Eleanor initially uncomfortable until he pointed out that investing in something he believed in was exactly what his money should be doing. Plus, he added with a grin, "When you're wildly successful, I'll get to say I knew you when." The firm launched in April with modest fanfare, but significant demand. Eleanor's reputation preceded her, and soon she had more clients than she could handle. All of them people facing difficult divorces who needed someone willing to fight for them. She hired 2 associates, both hungry young attorneys she'd mentored over the years, and rented office space in a building with huge windows and natural light. Sebastian threw her a launch party, inviting what felt like half of Manhattan's legal community. Eleanor stood in her new office, surrounded by well-wishers and potential clients, and felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what success actually looked like, she realized. Not just winning cases, or making partner, or achieving some external measure of accomplishment, but building something that reflected her values, that served people who needed help, that made her excited to go to work each morning. In May, Sebastian asked Eleanor to move in with him. They were having dinner at the ramen place in the East Village that had become their tradition, and he just blurted it out between bites of noodles. "I know it's fast," Sebastian said quickly, seeing Eleanor's surprised expression. "And I know you probably want to think about it and analyze all the implications and maybe create a spreadsheet of pros and cons because you're you. But Eleanor, I hate the nights you're not at my place. I hate waking up and not seeing your terrible bedhead or listening to you rehearse opening arguments in the shower. I want to share space with you, officially. Build a life that's ours rather than mine or yours." Eleanor set down her chopsticks, her heart racing. Moving in together was a big step, one that came with risks and complications. What if it changed the dynamic they'd carefully built? What if proximity revealed deal-breaking incompatibilities? But looking at Sebastian across the small table, his expression hopeful and vulnerable, Eleanor realized something. She was tired of letting fear make her decisions. "Okay," she said. "Yes, let's do it." Sebastian's face lit up with the kind of joy that made Eleanor's chest ache. "Really? You're not going to analyze it for 3 weeks first? I've been analyzing it since you first suggested staying over on a Tuesday," Eleanor admitted. "And every analysis reaches the same conclusion. I'm happiest when I'm with you. So yes, really, let's move in together." They spent June combining households, a process that revealed just how much stuff 2 successful professionals could accumulate. Eleanor's extensive book collection merged with Sebastian's tech gadgets and running gear. Her kitchen equipment, barely used, met his similar collection, and they both laughed at owning 3 high-end coffee makers between them. "We could open a coffee shop," Sebastian joked as they tried to figure out where to store the redundant machines. "Or we could just accept that we both have expensive taste and questionable impulse control," Eleanor suggested. They donated 2 of the coffee makers to a local shelter and kept the best one, a compromise that seemed to set the tone for their cohabitation. Living together brought its own adjustments and revelations. Eleanor learned that Sebastian was a morning person who bounded out of bed at 6, ready to conquer the day, while she preferred a slower wake-up involving at least 2 cups of coffee before attempting human conversation. Sebastian discovered that Eleanor worked best late at night, often staying up until 1 or 2 in the morning to prepare for cases, her laptop casting blue light across their bedroom. They learned each other's rhythms, created new routines, negotiated space and compromise in the way that people building shared lives must do. There were arguments, of course. A memorable fight in July about whether it was reasonable to have 18 throw pillows on the couch. A tense discussion in August when Sebastian's ex-wife Vanessa reached out wanting to reconnect as friends, a suggestion Eleanor firmly vetoed with several excellent legal and personal arguments. A stressful week in September when Eleanor's biggest case went to trial and she became someone Sebastian barely recognized, exhausted, short-tempered, living on caffeine and adrenaline. But they worked through these moments, learning that conflict didn't mean ending, that disagreement could coexist with love, that being angry at someone didn't negate caring about them. In October, they returned to the Grand Meridian Hotel for the same charity auction where everything had started exactly 1 year earlier. "Think they'll have another date with a stranger item?" Sebastian asked as they walked into the familiar ballroom. "Because I have $6 million this time, just to be competitive." Eleanor rolled her eyes but smiled, I think once was enough. Besides, I'm significantly less mysterious now. They'd have to market me as date with a woman who will steal your blankets and judge your coffee-making skills. That would still get competitive bidding, Sebastian assured her. As they found their seats, Eleanor looked around the room and remembered standing in almost this exact spot a year ago. Panicked and mortified, watching Sebastian's drunken bid spiral out of control. She remembered thinking her life was falling apart, that disaster had struck, that nothing good could possibly come from such chaos. How spectacularly wrong she'd been. The auction proceeded, items selling for amounts that still made Eleanor's attorney brain cringe slightly. Then the auctioneer announced a special addition to the evening's offerings. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise item tonight. Mr. Sebastian Cross has made a generous donation that he'd like to auction personally. Sebastian stood, squeezing Eleanor's hand before walking to the stage. Eleanor's heart began to race. What was he doing? They hadn't discussed any donation beyond their standard contribution. Sebastian took the microphone, looking more nervous than Eleanor had ever seen him, including during his most difficult divorce depositions. A year ago, I stood in this room and made what appeared to be a terrible decision, Sebastian began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. I was drunk. I was lonely. And I bid $5 million on a date with someone I'd never met. Everyone thought I was crazy. The press had a field day. My accountant had several stern conversations with me about fiscal responsibility. The audience laughed, recognizing the story that had been tabloid fodder for weeks. But that terrible decision turned out to be the best thing I've ever done. Because that mystery date was with Eleanor Chase, a woman I'd known professionally but never had the courage to approach personally. And that $5 million date led to a second date, and a third, and eventually to building a life together that I didn't know was possible. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Where was this going? Sebastian pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. No. He wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of hundreds of people, but he was descending from the stage, walking directly toward her, the entire ballroom watching with rapt attention. Eleanor Chase, Sebastian said, kneeling in front of her chair, opening the box to reveal a ring that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. You've taught me what it means to be truly seen, truly understood, truly loved. You've made me braver and more honest and more myself than I've ever been. And I know we said we'd take things slowly, but I've learned that sometimes the best decisions are the impulsive ones made from the heart, rather than the head. Eleanor was crying now, not caring that mascara was probably running down her face, or that everyone was staring. So here's my bid for tonight, Sebastian continued. I'm bidding everything I have, my heart, my future, my commitment to showing up for you every single day for the rest of our lives. Eleanor Chase, will you marry me? The ballroom held its collective breath. Eleanor looked at the man kneeling before her, this billionaire who had somehow become her best friend, her partner. Her home, a man who had been broken by betrayal and had chosen to trust again, a man who made her laugh and challenged her thinking and understood her ambitions without feeling threatened by them. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, absolutely yes. The ballroom erupted in applause as Sebastian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that made her forget they had an audience. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, the auctioneer's voice boomed through the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that's the most successful bid in our auction's history. Mr. Cross, that's going to be expensive. Worth every penny, Sebastian said, looking at Eleanor like she hung the moon and stars. They spent the rest of the evening in a blur of congratulations and champagne toasts. Hannah found Eleanor in the ladies' room an hour later, where Eleanor was trying to repair her makeup and failing because she kept crying happy tears. I cannot believe you got engaged at the same hotel where this whole ridiculous story started, Hannah said, pulling Eleanor into a tight hug. It's perfect. It's fate. It's the universe saying you're welcome for my excellent decision to sign you up for that auction. Your excellent decision that you made without asking me, Eleanor reminded her. But there was no heat in it. Sometimes friends know what friends need better than friends know themselves, Hannah said with a grin. You're welcome, by the way. I expect to be made maid of honor for my matchmaking services. You're absolutely going to be maid of honor, Eleanor assured her. Who else would I trust to tell all the embarrassing stories in the wedding speech? They returned to the ballroom where Sebastian was holding court with Marcus and several other friends, all of whom were giving him grief about the theatrical proposal. You set an impossible standard, Marcus was saying. How are the rest of us supposed to propose now? Anything less than a public auction declaration is going to look cheap. That's not my problem, Sebastian said cheerfully. I was shooting my shot. The rest of you are on your own. Eleanor rejoined him, tucking herself under his arm in a gesture that had become natural over the past year. Sebastian kissed the top of her head, a casual affection that made Eleanor's heart swell. This was real, she thought. This improbable, unexpected, absolutely perfect relationship that had started with a drunken bid and a charity auction. They'd taken the chaos and turned it into something beautiful, something lasting. And if Eleanor had learned anything in her decade of practicing divorce law, it was that the best relationships weren't the ones that started perfectly. They were the ones where two people decided to show up, to work through complications, to choose each other every single day. The end.